In this video, we're going to take a look at UV mapping. We have our crow here, and in order to get customized color information either from something we've painted or an image that we've downloaded, we need to have UVs. A UV is a point on a surface that describes a mappable area. Essentially, they provide a holdout area for an image to be placed into. Think of them as a clean sheet of paper being wrapped around your Polygon object. Now, our UVs need to be human readable. What that means is that when we look at this collection of points, we want to be able to look at it and say, I see the wing, I see the head or the foot. We don't want it to be this tangled mess of points and edges that we have no idea what they are, because eventually we need to bring these into a paint package and paint onto that UV area. So let's get started here. I first want to delete all my history. We're done modeling. We don't need to go back and make any changes there, so we'll delete the history, clean that up. And just as a good practice, I want to freeze my transformations. Open up this window down here at the bottom, my front view. I'm going to make this my UV texture area. So I'm going to go to Panels, Panel, UV Editor. And now I'll be able just to toggle back and forth between my UV texture editor and my other viewports. So in the UV texture editor, I can see that, hey, there is something in here. These are UVs. The reason why we have these is because they came from the model when we originally created a polygon cube that we extruded from. And so if I were just to look at my polygon cube options, the creation options, I can see that it has texture mapping here, create UVs. So that's where these came from. We don't really need them. They're kind of junk. You can see it doesn't look anything like any part of the crow. It actually looks more like pieces of a cube, which is exactly what it came from. If I wanted to, I could just ignore these, or I could select them all by right-clicking, go to UV inside of my UV texture editor, and just draw a big marquee around them to select them. And you'll see that they highlight green. I can go to Polygons. We could choose Delete UVs, and that would just clear those out of there. Leaving them would make no difference. I'm just going to undo that. And it doesn't make a difference because we're going to reproject UVs. So we're basically projecting all new UVs from my model anyways, which will negate these. All right, so I'm going to switch back to my perspective view here. I'm going to select the entire wing and project UVs for the wing. Turn off my grid so we can see things a little bit more clearly. And what I'm doing is I'm lining this up in my viewport because I'm going to do a projection. Now, when dealing with UVs, we want the projection type to match what we currently have selected, or vice versa. We want our selection to match our projection. Here's the different types of projections that we have: cylindrical, planar, spherical, contour stretch, and just kind of jumping back up here, camera-based and also automatic, which is really multiple planar objects that get projected. For the wing, I could either choose planar or camera-based. I'm going to go ahead and just choose planar just so that we can see that inside of here, we can choose to project from a specific axis, or I could choose the camera viewport. I'm going to go ahead and choose that one and then choose project. Close that down. And now what I've done is I've created a projection for the entire wing. And we'll switch back and go to my UV texture editor. And I'm going to right click to go to UV, grab this manipulator, which will drag all of those newly projected UVs with it, and just move it out into empty space. And we'll talk about the UV texture editor here in 1 second. First, let's go ahead and look at our wing. And what we've done is we've actually projected the entire thing, which really isn't what we want, because now I have overlapping UVs. I have the front UVs and the back UVs all sitting on top of one another. This is not ideal because they will then share the same texture space. So if I were to load up a texture here, the front would have the same texture as the back. because the UVs are sitting in the same spot. So in my UV texture editor, what I want to do is split these apart and separate them, moving them to different areas of my UV texture editor. Now you'll notice inside my editor, I have a lot of gray space and then some gridded areas. All of this space is active, but the main thing we look at is this lighter gray section. This is my UV texture space, or my normalized 0 to 1 texture space. Any image that I load up will show up here and then automatically be repeated into infinite space into the rest of these squares. So imagine out here, there is a whole another square, another one here, everywhere. We just don't represent it because it gets cluttered. But you could go in and under your grid options, extend so that it goes out in all directions, and then you would be able to see that grid everywhere. I'm not going to, it's pretty distracting. And I like having this empty space out here just for a workable area. Eventually, after I get these UVs all straightened out and looking good and non-overlapping, I'll move them back into this 0 to 1 area. Now, the scale of my UVs does not matter. What matters is the texture that I apply to them. So this is essentially infinite space, and I can scale things down, but as long as I have a nice large texture that they can fit into, I'm going to have a decent looking image on my model. I'm going to select the dividing edge of the wing. And when I say the dividing edge, basically I'm looking for that edge loop that would separate the wing into two evenly divided sections. And that edge loop right there is what I want. So I can just double click that right inside of the UV texture editor. And then I want to cut those edges. Up at the top here in my UV texture editor bar, I have the cut UV tool. But this is not actually the tool that we're after, and by default, it's collapsed. So I want to expand this section here, and you'll see we get a couple of more tools. And this guy that looks similar to our Cut UV tool is Separate UVs. So what this will do is along those edges that I currently have selected, it'll just automatically separate those or cut them. So I just clicked on that. I'm just going to choose my Select tool. Click on a single UV. And then go to Select and choose Select Shell. And what this will do is select all of the UVs that are connected to one another. I'll choose Select Shell, hit W. Let's turn off Snap there. And we'll just move that out. And you can see we separated it, and that UV shell is the back section of the wing. If I were to go to UV, if I were to select a single UV, I could then choose Select, Select Shell, and get the whole thing and then move it around. So here's the front of my wing. This is the back of my wing. And I can also right-click and choose Shell. And that allows me to go into a shell selection mode, move the entire shell around as well. Either or, it's going to get us to the same point just depending on how you like to work. And let's just switch back to UV there. Let's go ahead and take a break. We'll come back and look at some different parts of the crow that we can lay out.